All right.
Yeah!
Yeah! All right, here we go. Well, the story, it's a little different. Same last name as that character, Chan. Okay. The story's called The Bears and the Bees. Bernice Chan pumped her arms as she walked the 20 blocks from her home on 31st Avenue to St. Monica Middle School. Like a scientist, she observed 14 bums, men her father's age, who counted their cash earnings in public. They slurped 7-Eleven big gulps and yelled questions as she passed. With one who still had his teeth, she agreed that yes, tortoises were slower than tarantulas. Bernice laughed, a machine gun, heh heh heh, at the faded poster of a blonde woman eating a slice of pizza taped in the greasy window of Yum Yum Dim Sum. Her laugh did not endear her to the nuns who ran St. Monica's. "Today," said Miss Lynn, "I will teach you about the bears and the bees of sex, because you never know what garbage you learn out there." It was first period. The young nun who taught Bernice's favorite class, biology, wore blue pants and white seashell earrings and sat on the desktop the way teachers did in movies. We won't get into the nitty-gritty. It's not that type of class. But I will tell you that sex gets you babies. Remember the video about the pack of wild coyotes being born? Bernice remembered the documentary, how her heart had pumped faster and faster as out of the coyote mother's body 7 glorious pups glided, squealing, not barking. Bernice had barely been able to keep her seat. She had wanted to stand in ovation as the furless, pale, wet pups, ears still slicked down, piled on top of each other in the dirt. "What a miracle! What pure delight!" she had wanted to shout. "Can you imagine the pain?" Miss Lynn asked. "Her body splitting open like that? Who'd want to go through that?" The other students shook their heads, but Bernice made a sound like a trumpet exhaling, unable to mask her disappointment. Miss Lynn snapped her fingers for attention. "That is what sex will get you. Remember, once you have sex, boys won't see everything else that is good in you. Do you understand?" Miss Lynn nodded in response to her own question, then stood up and wrote on the chalkboard the 3 tenets that were practically the school's motto. Number 1, take your time. Number 2, don't be boy crazy. Number 3, don't spend too much money on clothes. Pencils scratched away in notebooks. But Bernice did not understand. She thought of the tenets her mother, a true scientist, had taught her. How sexiness was a state of mind, and it was a good mind that knew how to use it.
Yeah!
Most importantly, that Bernice existed because of biology, because different fleshy parts on her parents rubbed together that made sparks, and Bernice grew out of that light. How is biology not already a miracle? Bernice raised her hand. "My mother says that if you don't use it, you lose it." "And it's the birds and the bees." The sound of her classmates' giggles followed her and Miss Lynn out into the hallway. "You hardly speak up in class, and then you say this? What's going on inside that head of yours? Do you want to miss our next field trip to the Spider Museum because of your attitude?" Bernice smiled nervously and let out a weak, "Well, I'm glad you're getting such a kick out of this." Bernice shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot as the nun decided what to do with her. She thought about what she had read in National Geographic, about spiders' webs, that wound around anything that stood still for long enough, and flies that were not observant got caught in the sticky threads and died when spiders returned to suck out their blood. The decision was for Bernice to spend lunchtime with the nun, who sat cross-legged on her desk. Miss Lynn shaped curdles of mashed potatoes into God's beard, poured on gravy, black as coffee. God looked like he'd been in the sun too long because Miss Lynn used meatloaf for his face. Bernice could only eat half of her goose liver sandwich, which smelled overwhelmingly of onion, as she watched Miss Lynn flip through a fashion magazine. I dropped out of college to become a photographer for Vogue. Did you know that? Miss Lynn used her fork to point at Bernice, who shook her head and listened in fascination for the first time since the Coyote video. I owned expensive cameras. I learned how to outfox bosses, convince them to hire me over the photographers who'd been there longer. They all begged for my friendship like servants. I worried sometimes that I was building an empire of featureless friendships, like a queen bee and her hive of drones. I had 2 boyfriends at any one time, one Asian, one rich. I flew all over the world. I was everywhere, all of the time, for everyone. I was the opposite of repulsive. I was a magnet. How could you give it all up? Bernice cried out. Why are you here? Miss Lynn shrugged and tossed her holy meatloaf in the trash. I was like you, independent, but one day on a photo shoot in Seattle, I accidentally listened to Christian rock. I had not thought about religion for years, and I suddenly remembered a time when my life counted for something, what it felt like to not be alone. But this is death, Bernice said. Miss Lynn stretched out her legs, studied her sturdy leather sandals and flat toenails. She stood and spoke impatiently. Come, it's almost time for your next class. Clean up now, you can go. But I want to travel. I want to live a real life. Bernice threw her arms in the air for emphasis. Miss Lynn touched the girl's shoulder and this time more gently said, don't you know what it is that we're trying to teach you? We are not all equals, but life exists everywhere, not just out there, shining and glamorous. We all die. We are one of many. Now go. Bernice's steps out the classroom dragged. In the hallway, she wondered how such a golden life could lead right back to places like St. Monica's. How could Miss Lynn give up a jet-setting life for an empty one, eating cold leftovers and teaching kids not to have sex? Her steps continued to drag on her trek home from school. The straps of her black nylon backpack dangled off her hips like a lazy sea creature. At the first red light, a nearby munibus gave a tired tss as it kneeled to release 3 passengers. 2 were old and 1 was white. There was no homeless to observe. At the second red light, Bernice caught up with a woman who, from behind, resembled Miss Lynn, but bore a large dark mole on her neck. As they waited for the light to change, the woman folded her hands before her as if in lazy prayer. And Bernice wondered if Miss Lynn's Jesus saw the emptiness in the gesture. Bernice arranged her feet so that they lined up with the woman's. They stood side by side, equals, for 30 red seconds. Cars rushed by. The passing wind picked up Bernice's backpack straps, so they trembled like black wings. Thank you.